Lift up a banner on the high mountain. Exalt the voice unto them. Shake the hand that they may go into the gates of the volunteers. I have commanded my sanctified ones. I have also called my mighty ones for mine anger, even them rejoicing in my highness. The noise of a multitude in the mountains, as of a great people, a tumultuous noise of the kingdoms of the nations gathered together. Yahweh of hosts masters the host of the battle. They come from a far country, from the end of heaven, even Yahweh and the weapons of his indignation to destroy.
Hello, good morning. Welcome to Line by Line Bible Studies. We're going to begin studying the book of Daniel today. And got the wrong headphones on. There, I'm not going to hear myself better. Okay, and we're going to begin studying Daniel. Daniel is in the... I'm sorry, my nose is itching suddenly. That's unfortunate. Great way to start, right? All right. Daniel is in our Bible, in the Christian Bible, it is placed among the major prophets. Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Daniel. That's the grouped as the four. In the Hebrew Bible, Daniel is part of the wisdom literature. So it is grouped with, and this is just, like a lot of things, it's somewhat arbitrary. Somewhat, just like chapters. There's some sense to the chapters, but sometimes it's a little arbitrary because it's not always obvious that we need a new chapter or that that's the proper place to put one. I've pointed that out on a number of occasions in different books. So Daniel is placed among the wisdom literature. And I see why they do that. It has a little flavor of that because Daniel is a legendary wise person like Job. And I just mean because his wisdom is famous. It's quoted in, isn't it in Ezekiel when it says, though Job, Daniel, what was the third wise man with that? Was it Solomon? My mind goes to Solomon, but perhaps they would have chosen someone else. Anyways, but Daniel was renowned for his wisdom and for his, for his prophecies. So let's begin by reading. In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, came Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, unto Jerusalem and besieged it. And the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, with part of the vessels of the house of God, which he carried into the land of Shinar to the house of his God. And he brought the vessels into the treasure house of his God. And the king spake unto Ashpenaz, the master of his eunuchs, that he should bring certain of the children of Israel, and of the king's seed, and of the princes, children in whom was no blemish, but well favored, and skillful in all wisdom, and cunning in knowledge, and understanding science, and such as had ability in them to stand in the king's palace, and whom they might teach the learning and the tongue of the Chaldeans. And the king appointed them a daily provision of the king's meat, and of the wine which he drank, so nourishing them 3 years, that at the end thereof they might stand before the king. Now among these were of the children of Judah, Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, unto whom the prince of the eunuchs gave names. For he gave unto Daniel the name of Belteshazzar, and to Hananiah, Shadrach, and to Mishael of Meshach, and to Azariah of Abednego. I wanted to say Abednego, but it's not usually how we say it. Abednego. But Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with the portion of the king's meat, nor with the wine which he drank. Therefore he requested of the prince of the eunuchs that he might not defile himself. Now God had brought Daniel into favor and tender love with the prince of the eunuchs. And the prince of the eunuchs said unto Daniel, I fear my lord the king, who hath appointed your meat and your drink. For why should he see your faces worse liking than the children which are of your sort? Then shall ye make me endanger my head to the king. Then said Daniel to Melzar, whom the prince of the eunuchs had set over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, prove thy servants, I beseech thee, 10 days, and let them give us pulse to eat, and water to drink. Then let our countenances be looked upon before thee, and the countenance of the children that eat of the portion of the king's meat. And as thou seest, deal with thy servants. So he consented to them in this matter, and proved them 10 days. And at the end of 10 days their countenances appeared fairer, and fatter in flesh than all the children which did eat the portion of the king's meat. Thus Melzar took away the portion of their meat, and the wine that they should drink, and gave them pulse. As for these 4 children, God gave them knowledge and skill in all learning and wisdom, and Daniel had understanding in all visions and dreams. Now at the end of the days that the king had said he should bring them in, then the prince of the eunuchs brought them in before Nebuchadnezzar. And the king communed with them, and among them all was found none like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Therefore stood they before the king. And in all matters of wisdom and understanding that the king inquired of them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and astrologers that were in all his realm. And Daniel continued even to the 1st year of King Cyrus. Again, that goes to the Persians. And that means that's after they're conquered. And we start off, like many of the prophets, they give us the date of the king in which they took place. It's dated by the king. In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah. I would say also that, you notice as the Bible was written, the people who wrote it didn't seem to have an anchored date. It's always dated to the kings and their reigns. There's no anchored dating system, at least not internally to the Bible. That people say we can count the genealogies and all that. Okay. I've already made my views on that known many times in the Genesis study. But anyways, the 3rd year of the reign of King Jehoiakim, king of Judah. He was, I believe, he was the last. No, he wasn't. The last was Zedekiah. But he was the one. Zedekiah was actually appointed by Nebuchadnezzar to be king. And he rebelled against Nebuchadnezzar. And so this would have to be one of Nebuchadnezzar's earlier invasions, because he did not entirely, because notice it says here he took part of the vessels of the house of God. And it doesn't mention him burning the temple down, because that doesn't happen till the days of Zedekiah, I believe, who is also known as Jeconiah. Not Jehoiakim. There were a lot of Jehoiachin and Jehoiakim. Just remembering it now is confusing me a little bit. I should have brushed up on that a bit. But it's not really pertinent to our understanding. Like I said, that you can, there's charts and stuff. It's very simple to find out the answer to that question. And if it was interesting, I suppose I would have made sure. It is interesting, but it's not the prime thing. So let's move along. So Jehoiakim, one of the last kings of Judah, king of Babylon invades. He carries away part of the vessels of the house of God. The temple is not yet destroyed at this point. That happens a little later. But he carried these vessels into the land of Shinar, that's Babylon, to the house of his God. And he brought the vessels into the treasure of his God. That's because it comes later. It comes up later. Belteshazzar brings them out and has a party with the vessels from the house of God. And that's when the famous scene with the handwriting on the wall occurs. So, now the king, Nebuchadnezzar, now he's king of the Babylonians. The Assyrians have already destroyed the northern kingdom of Israel. There is no more northern kingdom of Israel. There's only Judah. There was people in Israel up there, but it was a mixture of Samaritans and remnants. The other remnants had come back to Judah, and now there's just the Jews. When the Babylonians come, they conquer the Assyrian Empire and also the kingdom of Judah, which is still independent. And other things as well. That's not, the Babylonians have an extensive empire at that time. They call it the Neo-Babylonian Empire, I believe, under Nebuchadnezzar, because there had been a previous Babylon in the Bronze Age. And so in the earlier Bronze Age, I should say. I'm not sure what age we're in exactly. I mean, a lot of these things, there's no like hard lines. Like the discovery of iron, they knew about iron long before the Iron Age. It just wasn't very common. All right, so he goes to the master eunuchs and he wants to make of the sort of to look for the nobly born children, because this is something people believe in, and have believed in for a long time. Like that. If someone was a king, well, you think like, well, he was pretty good. Maybe his son will be good. Or one of them, right? Maybe he will inherit some of those qualities that made him a good king. It's not absurd. It's just that you can't reliably predict that the firstborn's going to be, for one, the right one. Or that, and many times kings didn't have enough children or male children. They had trouble with it, especially when they were limited to one wife. That's why a lot of times in ancient times, kings didn't just have one wife. They had many wives. Even Israel, the father of Israel, meaning Jacob, he had multiple wives. Not that this was something he sought out, but in order to have 12 children, when people know I have 8 children and with one woman, they always are that's a big deal. That's like a lot of children with just 2 people. Usually when I run into people who have even more, it's like there's usually twins involved and stuff. It's like, because you have to start to really produce. I mean, certainly we could have had more, but, we're blessed enough. And so you look at like the people and you figure, well, okay, granted, that's not a ridiculous idea. So that's what they do. They look for children they look for physical features that they look good. A lot of times people in times past have thought that, and there's not, I don't know what, but, they would believe things like you could look at someone and they looked intelligent, based on how they look. Well-favored. I wonder what that means. In whom was no blemish, I don't need to really look that up. That means no physical defects. Well-favored. To beautiful in appearance, yeah. Well-favored. Skillful. And wisdom, it's considerate in wisdom or skillful, whatever. I'm just looking at the quick definitions. Cunning, and knowing. This is all fine. I don't think there's really anything. What about science? What do I mean by science? Yeah, science, as always, in other languages, really means thought or knowledge. Even, in the New Testament, it talks about science falsely so called. It's gnosis with a G. Gnosis. I think the G is silence. But sometimes I'll say gnosis. But it means knowledge. It's very similar to our word knowledge. It's just got a silent G instead of a silent K. And it means knowledge. And that's really what science is about. It's just knowledge. It's a collection of knowledge. Things that are, well, on one hand, it's a method, but also the idea it's a method of obtaining knowledge, and preferably reliable knowledge. That's what we call science. Not, but the idea of science in this context is not going to be quite what we think of as science. It's not going to be like test tubes and things like that and chemistry. It just means knowledge. It means knowing things. A lot of times like I was watching a channel that was really interesting. This guy was, it was an engineering channel, and he was showing how medieval architects using the engineering method and with no knowledge of science and not even using rulers and stuff, used certain rules of thumb to create beautiful structures and arches, and he showed these beautiful Gothic cathedrals constructed entirely without the benefit of science, because there were methods, and when you know those methods, and understand things, that's where the Gnostics came from in the New Testament. They preach this idea of like secret knowledge, and there's a great temptation to that to people when they preach the Bible and things like Daniel. It's like, we're studying prophecy, and people are very interested in prophecy, and that's great. I was always exceedingly interested in prophecy. I really want to understand the prophets. One of the reasons I spend so much time in Isaiah, because I found it so challenging when I opened my Bible. Daniel's a little different than all the other prophets. It has a lot more narrative than, say, Isaiah. Well, there's a bit of narrative, but it's much more of a, because Daniel's like a narrative, and then there's apocalyptic things, revealed things. We'll get to that. I don't want to get too far ahead of it. But anyways, so he has this idea to take, and this is something that I've talked about also, like when you're a war captive, people are often enslaved, right? But like in the story of Joseph, because of his abilities, he landed in a better position. And that's very true. Whenever slaves had skills that they could ply, it went better for them, because you get treated better when you are a more skilled slave. You like, oh, you can do this, and this is an in-demand skill. Well, maybe we won't send you to the salt mine. Why waste a skill that is needed when now we possess you and you can work for nothing? I mean, it's a win-win situation for the slave owner. So yeah, they want to make the most out of their slaves if they have abilities. If they don't, then they're just horses. They're just physical labor. As far as that's what they care about them. And so then the master of the eunuchs, of course, because the king of Babylon would have so many wives in order to produce offspring, and hopefully from among them, often they would then pick out the best one, often playing them off each other and in different ways. It just depends. You look at the story of David and you see the way his sons, there's like a lot of, because when you have multiple wives and you have a father who is a king or a big rich guy who owns something, if you have multiple wives all in the same house, like that's got to be such intrigue with them trying to boost their sons to be the ones to inherit. And that's what happened with Bathsheba and Solomon. She was very adamant in coming to David. You said my son Solomon would reign after you. And look here, your other son is making a big noise with a trumpet and saying he's going to be king now. Or this was in the works. And so David hastily, did what he did. I'm going to retell that story right now. But because you would have multiple wives, though, David didn't have that many wives, but he had a couple. No, he had wives. He had wives. Not like Solomon, though, right? And not like Solomon. He had many wives, and it was said so. David had a wife and then wives and concubines, and he didn't, so he had as kings in those days did. But he didn't go astray like Solomon did, and who actually was led astray by just all his wives. Which is a funny thing, the wisest of all taken down by the ladies. It shows that some things wisdom can't get you through. I get it. Anyways, in having that situation when you're a king and you have all these wives, they want to make sure that, the son is real smart. He's real smart. I want to make sure he's my son. and not Daniel's son, because Daniel's real smart, and not Ashpenaz's, because I want it to be my son. The king, though he may want the best son to reign, he still wants it to be his. He doesn't want just the best man to reign, someone else. And this is one of the flaws of inherited kingship, or what would I call it? Hereditary monarchy. There, we got the right word. This is the problem with hereditary monarchy. It's like finding a good heir. And really, the only way it could work is by having just lots of wives and producing lots of children and taking the best one for the next king. And it's weird because he doesn't even get the best one for the next king. So often you might get the most wicked one for the next king. It depends. If you don't take a hand in it. Like I said, there's a lot of ways that these things can go wrong, especially when you get complicated family situations. All these kids growing up in this just palace and stuff. What are the chances any of them are going to turn out right? You'd be better off appointing one of your eunuchs as the next king. And so Ashpenaz, the master eunuch. So that means Daniel's, because he's going to be put in this position of standing before the king, he's being made into a eunuch too. That's to be presumed. Now that means he would have his testicles removed, probably. That's not meant to be anything other than just FYI. It's like, you understand, it is often the case. Jesus himself even spoke of it. He says, some men are made eunuchs from the womb. Some men are made eunuchs by men, and some for the kingdom of God's sake. There's just sometimes it is not. One of the things, while marriage is something blessed and all that, and like I said, I would not voluntarily be made a eunuch. Of course, they were war captives. It was this or the salt mines, or what. It's not. What do you think happens to the other kids who were not well favored, who had blemishes, or had maybe not so much ability to stand before the king? They're just kind of mediocre. Where do you think they went? They probably didn't just go into a meat grinder or anything, but they didn't get into the king's house. Maybe they got into a lesser house. Maybe they just ended up as dishwashers and etc. And again, not everyone in Judah even was taken captive. Not at this time, certainly. But they took many of the royal seed captive as a way of, that would be often as a way of controlling the kingdom, because you take all the children and the family hostage, and then leave someone behind and say, all right, you better do what you're told, or they're all going to get, and that's just the way they would do it, right? Well-favored, skillful in all wisdom, cunning in knowledge, understanding knowledge. That's how you got to think of it. Understanding knowledge. They want people who are quick-witted, brainy. But also, brainy in that sense of deep, like not just witty, but also having understanding. I think the implication also is, not the implication, it says here, whom they might teach the learning of the tongue of the Chaldeans. They want to take intelligent people from Judah and teach them the tongue of the Chaldeans, and with a view for them to stand in the king's palace and become his advisors. And they want to take the most talented and use it, because war captives were considered part of the victory of the spoils. You take the good people and you put them to work. That's what they did. It's a very brutal calculation, but it's the way the world has worked for thousands of years, to tell you the truth. It's even till now, this is still kind of the way things work. But meaning deep down, this is the brutality that man reverts to. So I say you gotta be if we lose population, the world's population is declining. That's not good, because that will mean a return of slavery. Meaning not that it is gone now, but I mean a comeback for it. People talk, they're like, we need a revival of Christianity. What, is Christianity dead? We don't need a revival. We're still Christian. But I get what they mean. They want to see a big, inflow of people who have fallen away from the church back to the church, or maybe people that are, second generation have fallen away and coming back, which is more plausible, really. Meaning someone who was raised by someone who fell away coming back to the church as opposed to someone who falls away coming back. It's not always clear that you can fall away and come back, because the tendency to fall from the church is not a sign of election or calling. It's like, nor of very much faith. Like I said, a lot of times people confuse believing the stories with actual faith. You know what I mean? I've said this about many parts of the Bible. Some of the stories in Daniel, they're kind of fantastical, difficult to believe even, right? I believe in the miraculous for sure. But it's like, I understand it's not an easy pill to swallow sometimes. And sometimes the information also, like, it's like, okay, what does this represent? But even so, it's not that there are certain things I do believe, like Jesus rose from the dead. Like that, I believe that literally. I don't think that's just a metaphor for anything. Though it is a metaphor for, it's not a metaphor. There are metaphors for it, is what I should say. There are metaphors for the resurrection, but the resurrection, it's life from the dead. And that we put our trust. But like this Job, because I do believe Daniel is historical. I don't really think he isn't. And Job, I think probably, but it does feel more like a work of art. And and even if it is, it's a great, like, I don't know. People like, what's his name? Narnia. C.S. Lewis. He's a Christian writer. Right? I'm not 100% in agreement with a lot of his philosophical conclusions on a number of things, like hell, right? But still, it's like there's a lot of worthy things in those stories. Now, am I comparing it to the Word of God? Well, I sort of am. That's okay. We can compare things. I don't think it compares quite, though. I don't think it measures up to the level of something like Job, which I take as truly inspired. But it doesn't have to be literally true. That doesn't bother me. Like, I don't think believing that is what faith is about. Now, the resurrection, we do literally believe in that truth. But even that is not what faith, that is not the fullness of what faith is. You have to confess with your lips the name of the Lord Jesus and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead. But that represents, like, faith is our loyalty to him. And we are bound to him by faith. We believe in him, in his promises, in his abilities, in the same way I trust and believe in my wife, more so it should be, I believe in if I can't believe in my wife who I see, how can I believe in God who I don't see? If I can't believe in and trust someone who's that close to me, how can I believe in and trust God? But he's close enough and revealed himself to me, so I do. Yeah, but understanding knowledge has the ability to stand in the palace. The king appointed him. I said, lucky for them. Now, a provision of the king's meat. This word meat is not the usual word for meat you would find in the Old Testament. Now, one of the interesting things about Daniel is the first couple chapters are in Hebrew, and then it switches over to Aramaic, and then it goes back to Hebrew. I don't put a lot of, it's Aramaic is the language of Babylon and captivity. That's the language of the Chaldeans. And it's part of, if you're Jewish and reading it, I suppose that's a much more, because they often know both, because they're very similar. And so, whatever. So they have, I'm in the wrong, I'd like this thing back, okay. So they teach them learning the tongue of the Chaldeans to stand before the king, and they want to nourish them the king's meat. Now, this word meat is not the usual word for food. That's knowledge or thought. Their path bag. And it's actually a word of foreign origin. It's not a Hebrew word. This should be Hebrew because of the Hebrew section. But it is of Persian derivation. It's a loan word from Persian. And also notice there's a reference there to Sanskrit. I'm just saying that to my wife because I know they were talking about Sanskrit the other day and over in home education. Okay, it's of Persian origin. It means a dainty. So it's not just, you understand, okay, dainties. The other thing is that word pulse. I'm just going to say right here, it really means just like vegetables. Vegetables. It doesn't mean like, it brings to mind like gray mash. Like give me literally, I think of like paper pulp in a bowl. Like some really tasteless oatmeal or something. That's what it seemed like to me they were saying. Like just in the King James sound of things, pulse. I don't know where they got that, but it means vegetables, okay? But meat is not like, it's not like they were offering them like, oh, here's some steak, here's some chicken. Now, of course, meat would be involved in these delicacies, but oftentimes they're going to be unclean things that Jews would not be allowed to eat. And that's why Daniel makes it a point. He wants to, not defile himself. Right? He doesn't want to defile himself in eating the meat. He's observant of the law of Moses, including the things having to do with the dietary restrictions, because though he's captive, though he's been made a eunuch, he still wants to assert his identity as one of the children of Abraham. They can't uncircumcise him, so they can take his testicles, but they can't return his foreskin. He's still a Jew at heart. And he does not want to defile himself with a portion of the king's delicacies. Meat, oftentimes even in the King James, is used figuratively for all kinds of food. Like, let's sit down and meat. Let's sit down and meat and eat bread. It's like it's not. Meat is put for the whole thing. And so, and this word is Persian. It's not the usual Hebrew word for meat. So it means like delicacies, dainties. And so that can involve a lot of stuff, rich foods and wine. Now, like I said, this is not about a paleo versus, like a carnivore diet versus a vegetable diet. This is not what this is about. This is about a rich, the kind of diet that only kings could afford would be like an American diet. It's like the king's dainties is like a microwaved, corn dogs, and it's got some, fried chicken there, and it's got some, but except it's all wrapped up in like eel's bladders and or whatever. It's like, it's definitely not clean. Any of the meat there would be probably have been sacrificed to and offered to the gods first. As the animals were probably killed to the gods, and then the meat working its way down from that. For Daniel, there's no way he could possibly imagine getting actual kosher meat, because again, the Jews did not practice vegetarianism. And while I think vegetarianism, I think there's some good evidence. And I certainly believe it from anecdotal evidence that it's not good for pregnant mothers. It's not good for their child. And so that some form of animal protein is, we have the teeth of an omnivore. We don't have the stomachs of herbivores. But we a variety of food is good, in my opinion. But anyways, certainly man can survive on vegetables. In a well-balanced vegetable diet can definitely substitute for a meat-based diet. I think, like I said, I don't recommend, I'm not a doctor, I don't give medical advice. But I do think meat itself and eggs are not at all a bad thing. Now, baking, fish eggs into a pastry with lark's vomit. I don't know why that's from a Monty Python skit. frog's bladder, lark's vomit, some weird concoction. I don't know. Like I said, I would assume it would be rich food. Food that's prepared for a king that tastes real good. Most of that extra flavor, the sugar and whatever, the sweetness that they add, it's not good. And it may make you fat, but not in an attractive way necessarily. And again, the wine. Now that alone, just adding, if these young men they're being educated. This is kind of like Nebuchadnezzar University here for young eunuchs. And so they're giving them wine and rich food to fatten them up, to be, because in their mind, hey, the king gets the best. People don't understand. But Daniel does. He understands that there is a wisdom in not excess, but he may not understand it in that way, but he understands it more in terms of being faithful to the commandments of God. Being faithful to his identity as a Jew, as a child of Abraham, but also, especially as, I don't know what I call it, someone who was observant of the law of Moses. Especially. Because again, the Jews have this issue that on one hand they're an ethnicity, on the other hand they are a religion. And for the religious Jew who is quite religious, the non-religious Jew is a problem. One, that's wrong, right? From the perspective, one should honor God, and especially as a Jew. But it's also a problem that, it's always been in the history of Israel is the Jews that do not honor the Lord, who do not love the Lord and not keep his commandments are what bring trouble to Israel. It's part, and so Daniel's loyalty to the law, which is a manifestation of faith. It's not by keeping the law that we please God, but the faith that he has that leads him to keep the law is pleasing to God. Because he doesn't do this. This is not done to show off per se. Because it says in his heart, he's thinking, I will not defile myself. Who cares except God? He's been taken captive. His future as ever being a father, ever making children that would inherit in the future of Israel, taken from him. But he still in his heart thinks, I don't want to defile myself because God matters and he hasn't forsaken me. That's exceedingly impressive when you think about it, because you would think, like when it happened with Job, and it's illustrated, his wife said to him, why do you yet keep your integrity? Why don't you curse God and die? What has God done for you today? Of course, the answer was Job was, shall we receive good from the hand of the Lord? Shall we not receive also evil? And that's because it sometimes comes in the form of just naked evil. Sometimes it's chastisement. Sometimes things just happen. And sometimes, eventually the Lord allows Satan to overcome the saints and to kill them. That's a fact of the Bible. That's what eventually happens. Satan will make war against the saints and he will overcome them and kill them. That's what happens. That's not the end of the story, thank God, but that's part of the story. Something that has to be reckoned with. Don't be shocked when you're in that situation. And don't think God has forsaken me. It's like, this is what he promised would happen. If you're faithful to me, they're going to kill you. To be faithful to God, ultimately, it will lead you to places where men will want you dead when you stick to your integrity. And, not always and in every situation, because here Daniel has obtained God. Now, this could go very badly for Daniel making this request, obviously. You're a captive, you're a slave, you'll eat what you're given. And if you don't, and you don't look, what do you want? You want to go with the other slaves? You want to go to the salt mines or whatever? I don't know. I use the Roman example. You want to go to the chalk mines or whatever, where they're mining the materials. They're coughing up blood. So he requested the prince of the eunuchs that he might not defile himself. And he had brought Daniel into favor and tender love with the prince of the eunuchs. I want to know what that says. I did skip over the part where he changes their names to Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. I guess we could look at that here. Let's see. Well, let's just look at that. All right. So Daniel means God is judge, right? God is my judge. Hananiah means, it doesn't say, but it's got Ayah at the end. It's Mishael, something to do with El. Who is what God is? That's what it says. Who is what God is? That's what it says it means. Azariah, Yah has helped. Okay. And, but Hananiah didn't have a name. Hananiah. Or Yah has been gracious. For some reason it didn't say. Okay, there you go. Meanings of the names. I don't know what we should, I wouldn't read into it. Parents like to give their kids nice names, And so they gave Belteshazzar. It means Bel something or other. Bel the wise. Or, well, let's see. I do think the names are interesting. Might as well. Oh, did I just... No, I didn't. Okay. Belteshazzar. Babylonian name of Daniel. Come on, I want to know the meaning of it. Shadrach. They don't tell. Meshach. I know Nego is like one of their gods or something. It's like the Belteshazzar. Connected with Bel, but named then inexplicable. Okay, they say it's inexplicable. Protect his life. No, probably Babylonian Bel protect his life or something like that. Yeah, okay, so whatever. Belteshazzar, Bel protect his life or something like that. Shadrach. No, let's say any cues here from the Brown Driver Briggs. Meaning dubious. They say meaning dubious. Meshach. And, the meaning of names is a bit dubious. Some people give their kids names and it doesn't mean nothing. Oh, his name's Carter. Because he likes carts? No, it's just we call him Carter. It's not like a surname. I mean, it is a surname we've used for a first name. This one is, who is what Aku is? Oh, that's funny. They gave him a name that's a lot like, Mishael got a name in Babylonian that's like his name. I bet they thought that was funny. Mishael. We call you Meshach. We just changed the name of God. Who is like, what was it? The moon. Who is like Aku? Okay, whatever. Meshaku. It's probably Meshaku. Is that what it was? Meshaku? Meshach. Whatever. I guess Shach is, whatever. Who is what? Oh, no. Misha Aku. According to somebody. Okay, so. See, Misha Aku. Who is what Aku is? Interesting. Fascinating. Abednego. Servant of Nebo. Babylonian name of one of Daniel's companions. There we go. And now we want to look at what was this love affair, this tender love felt towards Daniel. Notice here's the thing. The Prince of the Eunuchs, he might have been in love with Daniel for all we know. I mean, it was whatever. He was very looking to help the young man out, Tender love with the prince. Compassion. There you go. He was compassionate. That's all it says. It doesn't mean anything more than that, but it sounds like it when you say tender love. Love me tender, love me true, right? It was favor. He had brought in favor and tender love, compassion. It does not, I don't think it even has any, even, let's see, does it have any noun masculine, compassion, rechem, noun, interesting, it means womb sometimes. Oh, this is that one that comes up in judgment. A man or two, a damsel or two. It's translated, but actually, literally a womb or two, which meant, it could be a it's interesting. It's the word. The word means the womb, but also it means compassion. Here it says literally womb man, woman slave. According to many, denominative from originally brotherhood, brotherly feeling. Oh, of those of the same womb. I get it. Now I see how that means compassion. It's like wombly, womb mates. We're womb mates, so we have compassion towards each other. So so it means of like a brotherly compassion. It's interesting that it just, I don't know. It does mean the womb, as cherishing the fetus, by implication a maiden, bowels. Okay. So, by implication a maiden. That's like calling a maiden the C word, by the way, if it means womb. It's just weird, but obviously it didn't have that negative connotation. I guess a lot like, I think that the same thing is true of squaw. It's considered derogatory. I don't know if it was considered derogatory by them when they used it originally. Yeah, I mean, so I don't know. But that's that word. So compassionate, very brotherly love, right? He felt a lot of Philadelphia towards Daniel as he's a eunuch too. Perhaps from some other conquered kingdom. He's the prince of the eunuchs. He's one of the people there who are there and whose lives have been taken from whose, not their lives, but their future. If they were ever going to have a family, well, no family. Now you are the family of the king. And you serve the king all your life. Anyway, so the prince of eunuchs is not real fond of the idea, of course. He's afraid the king is going to take his head. Why? He's like, hey, if I don't give you the food, you're not going to look so good. And I already explained, it's like, it's all this rich food. It's not necessarily healthy. Especially if you just take the stuff you want, but they give him a portion of the king's dainties. And whenever we think of these kings, we always imagine them getting overweight, right? I always think of, who's the king from the later in the, what's his name? Nebuchadnezzar, what is his name? It's gotta be later. No, it's gotta be earlier. Okay. Belshazzar. Okay, it's so close to Daniel's name, it throws me off. Belteshazzar. Daniel's name is very close to the son of, or grandson. I'm not sure if actually son or grandson. Nebuchadnezzar. And so he gets him to go along with this idea of like, okay, let us eat vegetables. And there's a lot of reasons why you can imagine they'd look better, especially with the no alcohol and not eating all that rich food. It could be, it would not be good for your health. I mean, that's obvious. So not to us, not necessarily to them. And to Daniel, he's not doing it like, oh, it's more healthy if I do this, I'll look better. He's just following the law of God and not defiling himself. And the Lord, it could be a miracle. But the Lord doesn't have to work a miracle because it's just a wisdom that works. Like I said, it doesn't have to be based on science. It can be just based on people knowing, just like fasting having been a thing for thousands of years. And people now will talk about the benefits of intermittent fasting and of prolonged fasting for your body, right? But that's not primarily why you need to do it, though that is a benefit. So there are benefits in obeying God. Yeah, there are natural consequences. Just like when Jesus was on the temple, and I mention this incident all the time, but it's important to remember. We don't want to tempt God. But also, we know that we can rely on God. But I don't tempt God in jumping off the building because I trust him in knowing that things keep working the way they do. It would be a really horrific world if gravity fluctuated significantly. Suddenly there was negative gravity. Well, hit the ceilings, and some people went flying up into the sky, right? And then suddenly it reversed again, and a lot of people, anyone caught outside was just smashed on the ground. And people in houses are trying to crawl over to the wall, hopefully, so to make sure they don't, when it changes again back, they don't get slammed on the ground, and hopefully they don't get injured. Of course, all the cars have. It's the thing that happens once and catastrophically destroys civilization. If we even once, right? So it's obvious we have to have a world that's reliable. Or let's say it's a kindness that the world is reliable. It's part of what helps me trust God, because the world is reliably predictable in many repeatable ways. That's what science teaches us. That's what we can learn by using science. The repeatable consistencies of the world. We call them laws often, but they're not really laws. That's another thing. They're just predictable events that are consistent. And so then we have good cause to believe that they're going to continue to work the way they have in the past. So it's a I don't want to call it unintended consequence. I think Daniel knows he may just know that the vegetables are going to be better for him than all that rich food and wine. It's a known wisdom of Solomon even that wine was folly. So the Proverbs are loaded with verses about wine and meaning, and that's like that kind of, people often argue about what was written when, but this knowledge is all present. Like I show in Genesis, even with the patriarchs, they obviously had a sense of religion, and there are also other religions present, but also certain societal norms which everyone shares. Like I understand about how to make contracts and stuff. Basic laws of, the basic things that govern transactions and stuff, and how people account for things. So, anyways, it's not. I think much of a stretch to think that Daniel might have a sense that this is good for you. Certainly better than, he would prefer his kosher meat and the way they ate. Again, because they were not fabulously wealthy, the kingdom of Judah either, and it wouldn't be quite as luxuriant as the king of Babylon, perhaps. And certainly, I don't know, if someone was being observant of the law and of just I would say, you don't even need to observe the law because it's not even really a legal affair. We know that gluttony is not right. It's sinful. We shouldn't eat too much. We also have a problem with the quality of the food we're eating, that it's really bad. We eat the dainties of the king all the time. I don't, but sometimes I do. Sometimes I do eat things that are not just vegetables. Okay, that's for sure, or not just simply prepared foods. Actually, we do eat quite a lot of that. We eat food that's prepared. We don't buy a lot of processed foods. I try to avoid that as much as possible. But it's very standard in our American diet with fast food and meals prepared, TV dinners and stuff like that. And all these boxed meals with strange ingredients that no one's ever heard of in them. You're getting the equivalent of the king's dainties, and it can make you fat without you overeating it, without you even being a glutton. I mean, there's a reason why the Bible doesn't say, oh, bodily exercise. Everyone needs tons of it. Because, it's not obvious that everyone gets fat just by existing. It's not merely gluttony. Sometimes it is gluttony. And then that's a problem we have to deal with. Sometimes it's other things. But, it's well known among the wise that wine is a mocker. Strong drink is what? It's a fool's errand to go and participate in it. It's a foolish thing. And we know this. Daniel knows this. And so he says, hey, well, prove us. Give us 10 days. And you let all the other guys can drink and eat junk food. And we're going to just eat vegetables and water. And so it's not surprising that intent, not to us, because we do have, we have even greater knowledge and understanding. We understand more than the ancients. We do. And we ought to. I mean, my God, haven't we learned anything? I mean, not that all of us do. Many of us, unfortunately, have learned some new things. They've learned how to exist in this technological age, but they haven't brought the wisdom of the past with them. And that's a great mistake. It's how they will destroy it all, It's all coming down. And it's unavoidable, because the forces at work. You can't. The wicked and the violent press their way to the front, and they're in charge. It's hard to defeat. You have to defeat them. You almost have to become like unto them. So it's like, it makes me think, the Lord rebuke you. So at the end of 10 days, their countenances appeared fairer and fatter in flesh. I wouldn't say like they seemed like obese, but that they looked full. Their countenances, not necessarily like obesity fat, but they looked filled out and not malnourished. Because you eat nothing but wine and bad food. You can make you look dried up and kind of malnourished. Especially if you're not getting all the minerals. And that's the thing about vegetables, I would say, is that, one of the reasons I'd say you can't just eat vegetables these days is because the vegetables in the store are terrible. Daniel's vegetables would have been much more, they would not have been factory farmed. And I don't know how we get away from a lot of it, because it's like sometimes it's just a nightmare. You walk in the grocery store, you can't hardly find stuff that's made without seed oil or whatever. Anything you want to eliminate that they've stuck into our diet, it's hard to get rid of. And some things I just sort of settle for limiting it. So he gave them pulse as vegetables. And pulse is a bad translation as far as I'm concerned, but maybe it made sense in the King James time. You just got to know that that's vegetables. And meat is not meat. It's delicacies. Dainty things. As for these 4 children, God gave them knowledge and skill in all learning and wisdom. And Daniel had understanding in all visions and dreams. He's like Joseph, an interpreter of dreams and visions. And they were also wise and skillful. Again, they were probably from noble families back in Israel. And so they had education, because they had education in Israel for the noble families. As often in the past, that's been the case. Education and literacy was not a general phenomenon. It was limited to the upper classes. And that's why they look there for easy pickings, so to speak, finding young men who are already trained in a lot of things, who can just be taught their language and then bring the wisdom of the other society to bear. And there was a certain, Babylon and Persia had a certain openness about this to ideas and stuff like that. The Jews have a very particular idea, though. They serve their God. They have a covenant. They're a covenant people. And so that creates friction with the rest of the world, as it's described in the New Testament as enmity, hostility. There's a hostility. Yeah, because it's like when one group, it's like when the Nazis called themselves the master race. I remember, Monty Python's The Life of Brian, they poked fun at that sort of thing. They basically had the first century Jews talking with German, some of them, the zealots, talking with German accents and sort of like, asserting master race status, right? And it's meant to be a joke, but there is a sort of understanding there when God chooses out a certain people and says, "This is my people." Everyone else is naturally left feeling like, "Well, who do you think you are?" It's like, we're like, well, what makes you think God? Where did God go from me to talk to you? That's what one of the prophets said, right? The people already feel like, well, why not me? Why not us? Why not my people are the people of God? And in fact, this is an impulse that's taken up very often, with the Hebrew roots movement, attempting to draw closer to the traditions of the Hebrews, but also with things like Anglo-Israelism, which I was a part of, or Afro-Israelism, which I've definitely encountered, where people want to establish their ethnic group as somehow the true Israelites, which at this point I find absolutely pointless, because Christ has slain the enmity. He has put to death the hostility that exists between Jew and Gentile. Not that it's not there in the world, but it's not built into the relationship that God has ordained. I mean, before God ordained this relationship with him and Israel. This is my people. They're a peculiar people. They're mine. All the rest of the people in the world are not my people. That created hostility. But with Christ, that hostility is removed, because now he makes no difference between the Jew and the Gentile. They both come to God on the same basis. And Paul says, what advantage hath the Jew? Well, chiefly that to them were committed the oracles of God. And the covenants and all that, that's a benefit too. But once you become born into Christianity, you kind of have the same benefits. So even that had diminishing returns. And it doesn't have any return at all for Jews who are not being blessed with the scriptures and exposed to the Old Testament. And the New Testament would bless them even more. A lot of them don't understand they don't understand the New Testament was written by Jewish heretics, essentially. That's the truth of it from their perspective. These were Jewish heretics. They think it's like a Roman book, a Catholic book, or an Italian. One Jew even said, I thought Jesus was Italian. Because they don't really hear anything about him. It's just something else that they don't have anything to do with. It's how most Christians really know about a lot of other religions. Like Mormonism. I know a bit about Mormonism, but I know that a lot of people know almost nothing about Mormonism. Even though it's a religion very close to our own. So, let's see. The king communed with them. Among them, there was found none like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Therefore, they stood before the king. They were the most exceptional of all the exceptional children. In all matters of wisdom and understanding that the king inquired of them, he found them 10 times better. Again, that's not is that a precise measurement? Again, see, when I read the word of God, like I see that. Now, what does that represent? Is that God's truth? Did God inspire the prophet that that's exactly how much better they were than the magicians? Or is that what Nebuchadnezzar said? And that's just his thing. You're all 10 times better. That's what I find. It's a symbolic number, obviously. 10 times is it's an order of magnitude. And so, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians. That's and I see that as a true report of his opinion. That was of the king's opinion, they were 10 times better. That's not God saying they were exactly 10 times better. And again, he found them. I mean, what I'm saying is, like, understand what you're reading in the scripture and how much weight you have to put on it. How literally do you have to take that? Do we have to take that super literal? Not at all. Only literally in the sense of, I'll take it that's how Nebuchadnezzar felt. And I would also put God's hand in that, in the way he won Daniel favor with the prince of the eunuchs, or he's the one who's the chief eunuch, basically. He also would find favor with the king. And a lot of times that is through the wisdom he's given. Through the wisdom and understanding he has, he's able to speak well for himself and to benefit the king. And before we quit, I just want to look at magicians and astrologers. Because again, I want to know that it's what, obviously, I remember when I was young, there was a question in my mind, is like, magicians, are they bad? Is it evil? Because it's sometimes evil in the Bible. It's in the law, it's like, you don't, magicians and witches and all that stuff. Now, for one, I do look at it very much like I look at the woman taken in adultery. There are certain sins for which we do not put people to death anymore, and for which we have leave to grant mercy, for sure. At least mercy that they should not die. You know what I mean? It's like I don't necessarily think you exalt aberrant behaviors in society, God forbid, but so it's things that are not. I don't know, it depends on the circumstances, like I said, because there are some offenses that are, we can't as a society let murder go on, and adultery has consequences. Just because Jesus let her off from being killed doesn't mean that she deserves to stay married necessarily. She might find herself abandoned by her husband, if that's the case. Or maybe he was just a married man and she had no husband. There was no infidelity really on her part. But again, you don't know the situation of who was brought there. Anyways, so what is a magician? Is it David Copperfield? Is he an evil magician? Because even David Copperfield was careful when he came out to talk about it as illusions. Because, of course, it's not meant to be supernatural magic. No magician... Those magicians in the past have definitely played on that. It was funny. I remember watching I don't know if it was the Three Stooges or something. There was a magician, and he called himself Dante, which sounds a lot like Dante's Inferno. And there was some smoke and a big devil's head as part of his stage accoutrements because of the close association of all such arts with the devil. And they are associated with the devil. I mean, because an illusion and deception, while it can be done in the right spirit for fun, it can be nothing but fun and harmless, right? But done to deceive, done to manipulate, it's wicked evil, man. Right? I mean, to deny the trick of it. That's why Copperfield, of course he's not an evil magician, because he's upfront. He's not deceiving you. He's not trying to claim to have magical powers. He's just tricking you. And he's tricking you. And as long as that's in place and that understanding, I think the evil of magic working or whatever, and I also notice it means an engraver or writer. So it doesn't really mean magic anyways, right? Because that's definitely doesn't say illusionist. It doesn't say conjurer. But here it does say, only in a derived sense of one possessed of occult knowledge. Meaning, so this word means a writer, but it means a writer. Like, not in the way we mean it. Like the word woke originally meant like enlightened. That's why it's a terrible word to use, actually, because it's you're using it ironically. To talk about very unenlightened ideas as though they were calling them woke, like it originally meant, I think, that being aware of the racism that black people encounter in everyday life back in the early aughts or whatever, and now it's come to mean like all this other stuff. Well, words sometimes do take on different meanings, but You want to use stuff that's most useful. So calling a magician a writer, oh, he's a writer, because why? Because magicians were maybe writing spells or acquainted with occult knowledge or something like that. And so the writing became so closely associated with all that other stuff that it really lost its original meaning. So woke doesn't really mean awake. It means people who are deluded, at least in our mind, right? It means people who have this ideology that is evil in our mind, right? And so the same thing with a magician. It starts off just like, well, they're a graver, making graven images, making graven spells, and graven this and graven that, and engravings. They were associated with such things. Tellers of hidden things. So that's magicians. This is the word for astrologers. So, and it's only here in Daniel, 2 occurrences. Shaf, a conjurer or necromancer. I wonder if they mean necromancer as I understand necromancer, like someone who gets involved with the dead people, communes with the dead. Probably a Babylonian loanword, it says. Assyrian, asipu. Compare Aramaic conjuration. Of dubious meaning whence following. From an unused root, probably to mean, probably meaning to lisp. Practice enchantment, a conjurer. Well, I remember that being translated something. It's translated with astrologer. Well, whatever. So that's not quite. It's more of a brand name. Like I said, it's a foreign word. So it's like when we talk about the imams. Right now, I'm talking about an Islamic leader of a mosque or something like, right? A teacher of their scriptures. It's like if you said a pastor, but those are in our language and that's in their language. And in the language of the people who practice the astrology or whatever, that would be this thing, shashaf or whatever. And that's kind of the brand name, like priest. Well, priest is across many languages. I'm not sure what imam means, but like where you have like a proper name for a kind of job, and then it just becomes, even though it means like, oh, he's a writer, but what the writers do in our society is they write about the devil. So he's also a devil worshiper or whatever. So the two things become confounded, and so the word doesn't mean exactly what its root meaning is. It's interesting. Okay, anyway, so Daniel continued even to the first year of Cyrus, so all the way into the Persian Empire. So we'll continue with chapter 2 tomorrow. Thanks for joining me. We're a little over. Sometimes that happens. Until next time.
Lift ye up a banner on the high mountain. Exalt the voice unto them. Shake the hand that they may go into the gates of the volunteers. I have commanded my sanctified ones. I have also called my mighty ones for mine anger, even them rejoicing in my highness. The noise of a multitude in the mountains, as of a great people, a tumultuous noise of the kingdoms of the nations gathered together. Yahweh of hosts, masters the host of the battle. They come from a far country, from the end of heaven.